Hello, everyone. I hope you had a great weekend. Should have fixed my hair before I came on live, but it is what it is. Anyway, got some exciting stuff for you today. So today and all of this week, we're going to be talking about emotional connections with food, because first of all food has emotional connections, and food is rooted with our emotions and how we connect with other human beings. So this week is going to be exciting. So as you start to lose weight, especially if you have more than 75 pounds to be required to lose, it what ends up happening is, because if you are obese, you are using food to help cope with the emotions. And we do this in little ways, and a lot of times it is triggered from either past trauma or experiences that we've had that end up causing us to turn to some mood altering substance. And some people turn to alcohol, some people turn to drugs. Others of us, we turn to food. And that's a particular challenge, especially since you can't get away from food, right? So you can live without alcohol, you can live without drugs, you cannot live without food. So it's a bit of a dangerous territory, because we have to navigate this balance of, am I eating because I'm hungry, or am I eating because of something else? And traditionally, going on diets, following other programs and plans are usually the go-to method. But I have found in my experience, and if you're like me, maybe you found this as well, I found that I can maybe get about 75 pounds down in what I need to lose by following somebody else's program. And then what ends up happening is there's a little bit of a backlash that ends up happening. And that's because most programs don't teach you how to deal with the emotions that come up now that you're no longer using the food as a coping mechanism. And those emotions that caused you to gain the weight start to come back up. Okay? When this happens, it's also at the same time, you've lost some of the initial motivation from losing the weight, you aren't getting the praise that you are, and now it's a little bit of a daily grind of just kind of doing the same thing. And this is where most people end up giving up. They have daily frustrations that get in the way, life gets in the way, work, stuff like that happens. So let's circle back a little bit more to, the emotional connection with food. And why I say that is universal is because everybody has an emotional connection with food. And this starts even as a child, as a baby. When you're born, if you're being breastfed, then you get your nurture and your connection with your mother by food, right? So it's natural that we have this connection, okay? And, think of all the positive connections. It's not just the negative connections with food. It's all the positive connections that we have, sitting down with a family dinner and breaking bread together and having those family meals, connecting with one another. Food is connection. So trying to navigate this without being punitive in the way that it's dealt with, because a lot of times it's like, oh, you're just emotional eating and you should be able to control that. It's like, well, no, there's a whole lot of underlying connections that are there, and it's about understanding those and really diving deeper into it and really seeing where those connections are, of where it's off balance. So these aren't huge monumental shifts that I teach or that I actually practice myself. These are tiny little shifts. And when you think of other connections too, it's like, every food that we have has a connection. So think of comfort food. And I'm going to share a story that isn't actually mine. It's from the show True Blood. I don't know if anybody's watched that, but way back in season 1, I think, Suki, her grandmother passed away, and everybody came over the funeral. They all brought food. Why? It's comfort, right? So they brought comfort food over to soothe her and everything. And I never forget this, this thing is after everybody left and she was alone by herself, what was left there, she had put all the other food away, but there was this pecan pie, and it was the last thing that her grandmother made before she passed away. And she sat there and she ate the entire pie. Now, that's a lot of pie, I'm not going to lie. But it wasn't so much that she needed it or she was craving it or anything. It was, she was trying to gain that emotional connection. So when we start to explore emotional connections with food, this was her way of connecting with her grandmother, right? So we always have some sort of connection with food that is emotional, that connects us to another person. And understanding these connections is key to recognizing the patterns and being able to prevent the binges. So now some of you out there might be going, no, Tina, food is fuel and I just, stick to the plan and that's all you have to do. Great. That is awesome. If that works for you, I am thrilled. But there's still an emotional connection. Think about it. The fact that you are sticking to the plan, you're not deviating from it, you're feeling strong, you're feeling confident. Those are emotional connections because you're only eating these foods and you're not allowing yourself to eat these foods. And if that works for you, awesome. You're probably not my client, but I hope you can get something out of this video anyway. That being said, for the rest of us that do struggle with food and that connection with it and the emotional connection, there are certain things that end up happening for us. And before I go on to that, I want to talk about, even in the business world, okay, in corporate, any of the sales reps that I ever dealt with in corporate, or was myself, you had a certain budget. And you had to spend it. And if you did not spend that money on taking your clients out for lunch or dinner or a coffee, something like that, you got in trouble if you didn't use your spending account properly, because that is a way to connect with other people. And when you have that face-to-face connection, you get a closer, stronger bond. So there is always an emotional connection with food. So let's move on to talking about triggers that end up causing binges. And these are tiny triggers. I'm not talking full-blown anxiety attack that you're under your desk in the fetal position kind of stuff. I'm talking about simple little things that start building up, and their emotional reactions or inability to react emotionally is more accurate. Because what ends up happening is there will be things that'll go on through your day. And if you've experienced past trauma, like I have, or even if you haven't, maybe it's just conditioning from childhood, okay? Maybe it's not traumatic, maybe you had a great childhood, but there's certain conditions and responses and connections that you have with food that end up building up, okay? So for me, I'm going to talk a little bit mine. One of the things that I had was the feeling of not being heard, because the abuse that I went through, when I shared that and I told teachers, I told parents, I told friends, all that kind of stuff, nothing was done. So I have a reaction to, if I don't feel like I'm being heard, then I may react negatively, right? Now, when this happens in the corporate environment or at work or something like that, of course you have to be an adult. You don't lose your shit. You just, you have to keep your cool, right? But that emotion still gets triggered, right? And if you don't understand how to deal with it, it goes subconscious. And so you could have triggers around tiny triggers, right? Things that happen, so if you have one like me of not feeling heard. So say you're at work and you pitch an idea and it gets shot down and you're just like, okay, well, nobody really appreciates me. Nobody, you might think along those lines. Now, you could also have things where, you maybe weren't believed when you did bring something up. So say something at work happens where you present some data and you've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and you've said, hey, this is the data, these are the numbers, and somebody says, no, I don't believe those numbers, right? And you can argue that stuff back and forth, and that's fine, but it still triggers an emotion. Right? So these are all little things that can happen. Maybe you've dealt with a rude customer during the day and you can't really say what you want to say, and maybe you have a trigger where you weren't allowed to express feelings of when you were angry. And so all of these little things build up because, hey, you got to do your job. You're an adult and you just push those or compartmentalize those emotions. But if you don't recognize it, what it's going to end up happening is you go pick up the kids and they're loud in the car. Maybe you've got an issue with loud noises and that was yelling and stuff like that. Or you get frustrated, you lose your temper, and all these little, tiny little triggers start building up. And it's like putting all these things onto a scale, right? You know, and then it starts building up. And then next thing you know, it tips over. And then you end up having a food binge. You end up eating snacks and stuff that you didn't plan on eating. You do it out of reaction. And this is because we don't take the time to become aware of how our emotions and how they're affecting us. And then we end up doing things that we get to the heck with it point. And we, you know, I'm just going to have XYZ treat, or I'm going to have an extra serving of this, or I'm not going to eat the salad that I was planning on and I'm going to go get pizza instead, or something like that. That's something that you end up self-sabotage, and I won't get into self-sabotage on this call. Or maybe even you're really good and you're strong and you white knuckle through it and you're like, nope, I'm not going off the plan, I'm sticking to it, right? And you follow through. And then what ends up happening is maybe a day, maybe a week, maybe even a month later of you white knuckling it and just, you know, staying strong with it. I promise you, if you have more than 75 pounds, even if you have less, I'm sure other people have been through this as well, but if you have more than 75 pounds to lose, you're going to get to the point where you're just going to snap and you can't white knuckle it. And then you'll have a backlash. It's like that pulling that elastic band, it snaps back, and then you end up having to, you know, deal with additional emotions of feeling guilty, being critical of yourself because you didn't follow the plan, you didn't stick to things. And there's this whole backlash thing that happens. And then you end up having this whole cycle. So we want to definitely avoid that. And here's 5 tips that I use to process emotions around food, to prevent getting into a situation where I end up having that emotional backlash, and I deal with the emotions that come up. And what I want to say with this is, I know it sounds really scary, you know, doing all this emotional work, but I believe that by doing this, it actually prevents longer term consequences. It prevents me from, you know, not racking up that emotional debt, and it allows me to deal with the feelings when they're small rather than big, right? You know, so they don't stack up. And when they're small, they're tiny, easy little shifts rather than having to go through and dig through all of this stuff, right? So it's hard, but when we start putting these practices in place, this is why I know as I go down, I will never go back up. So, number 1 is start observing and becoming aware of your emotional connections with food. These could be positive. Hey, this is the food I love to eat when I'm celebrating. This is the food I love to eat when I'm ticked off, I'm sad, I'm annoyed, I'm bored, right? What are the foods that you like to eat? And pay attention to the emotions that come along with them, because that is going to start giving you ideas of what's going on. And when you start seeing those patterns happening, you can start to make different choices, and you can do this based on logic rather than reacting emotionally, because when you're reacting emotionally, you don't actually have control over what's going on, and you can't actually prevent it, because that emotional reaction is the irrational child part of yourself, and they're not logical. And if they're driving the car, you're going to make some bad choices and probably end up crashing. So pay attention to what foods, just start to become aware of it. And it's like, or if you found yourself, oh, I went and ate that again. Okay, what was going on? How was I feeling today? Did I not get enough sleep? Was I cranky today? Did I have a fight at work? Am I just bored, right? Was there something else I needed to do? Or am I mad at myself because I should have done X and I did Y instead? Whatever it is, start recognizing the emotional connection and those patterns, okay? So number 2 is to retrace. I kind of blended those a bit, but retrace the food or the craving. Cravings are really important. So I break these down into 2 things. They're either a physical craving or an emotional craving. So if it's a wanting connection and you find that, hey, you know what, you're craving chicken wings because you always go out with your buddies and eat chicken wings, then maybe it's not that you're craving chicken wings. Maybe it's you're craving that connection with your friends, and maybe picking up the phone and calling them and talking to them would be enough. And you'll start to recognize that there's connections with different emotions to different foods that you may have. So example, one that is very common is if you crave things like dairy or ice cream, things like that, oftentimes dairy is connected to sadness, and there's different emotions that reside in different parts of your body. So really start to connect, especially if you've eaten those foods. Is it something that is an emotional connection, or is it a physical craving? Because sometimes your body's giving you cues that maybe, so example, maybe if you eat chocolate, you always drink water with it. Maybe when you're craving chocolate, it's not so much that you want the chocolate, but your body's trying to tell you to drink water, but because you always tend to pair water with chocolate, it'll tell you, hey, drink chocolate or crave chocolate, because I know when she has chocolate, she's gonna drink water, right? So try to make those connections. The third one, and I use this quite often, is adding in a time delay before you eat whatever it is that you're craving. So if you're like, okay, especially if you're feeling emotional. So finding, okay, if I'm emotional, I look at the clock, okay, I'm going to wait 1 hour. And then if I'm still wanting that thing, then I'm going to go have that thing. In the meantime, make use of that time. So you can do meditation. So a lot of times I will do something like calming, soothing music to kind of get me grounded again and really focus on those emotions. Or I might use a productive activity like, okay, I'm going to go do these things first, and then when I'm done that, then I can come back and I can have that snack or meal or whatever it is, right? Just so that I know that I am not immediately turning to food in order to soothe the emotions or deal with the emotions, okay? And the more time that you can spend or put in between that, then it's more of a conscious choice. You're not reacting. You're more in control of what it is that you're eating and how you're eating. And this gives you a lot more freedom, a lot more choice. Number 4, I will also do what I call is a stack and delay. So stacking is, okay, say I'm craving chocolate, okay, we're going to eat a banana first. That's something sweet. It's healthier option than chocolate. I'm going to eat that first, and I'm going to wait a half hour or going to wait an hour. If I still want chocolate, then I will have the chocolate, right? So it's acknowledging what it is that I'm craving, what it is that I'm wanting, and then putting something healthy before it, giving my body something it can actually use, something that'll be nutrient dense and nourishing for my body. And oftentimes when I do that, I actually don't want the thing that I wanted. I did this the last week. I was craving salty, and I was like, oh, maybe, like, I haven't had chips in a while. Maybe I'll have some chips. And I'm like, okay, you're craving something salty. Let's have a couple of dill pickles. They're salty. See if you want that. If you still want that afterwards, have that. I didn't actually want the chips afterwards. I was like, okay, that's good. That's a lot less calories, a better choice. It's low sodium pickles, but they were still enough. And sometimes I'll do this too with, I have my crazy cat lady mug, and I cut up some slices of lemon and I put some honey and water in there. And that oftentimes takes away the sweet craving that I have sometimes, right? So it's warm in the tummy. Lemon's good for you. It's citrus, water, honey, that kind of stuff. So those are little things, and I call that one stack and delay. So give yourself a time delay before you indulge in the snack. And then the last one is replace and substitute. So replacing, like I had said, instead of eating chips, have dill pickles. Instead of, having chocolate, have a piece of fruit, something like that to replace it. Give yourself those nutrient-dense options first and see if that helps you prevent some of those cravings and prevent some of the binges, and also allows you to see what the emotional connections are and see, am I actually really hungry, or is there something I need to process first before I add more food to keep those down? Because oftentimes when I process those emotions, then I do not need to use food as the tool to cope. So I hope this was helpful. If you found it helpful, and I always forget to do this, but hey, hashtag live if you watched it live, hashtag replay if you watched the replay, and hashtag emotional if you want me to do more videos like this. So hope this was helpful, guys. Have an awesome day and a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.